in case of COVID, or like a small quantity of nucleic acid, even a DNA is possible. Okay, and these either RNA or DNA is subjected to systematic replication and then amplification. The RNA and the DNA copies which are present in a sample, they are multiplied in a closed environment till the time that it is detectable. So when we are talking about doing a COVID-19 by RT-PCR, what we are doing is we are collecting the sample, a nasopharyngeal swab or an oropharyngeal swab, okay, and we are trying to isolate the RNA from the given sample, and that RNA is subjected to amplification and replication till the time it becomes detectable. And that is how we diagnose or say that this COVID-19 RNA is present or the test is positive. Jignesh sir, may I request you to, there is a video YouTube link uh, at the bottom of the slide. So I have come across a very nice video on YouTube, which I am requesting Dr. Jignesh to play. It is just a 3-minute video, and it explains how the RT-PCR reaction works. It is just for our knowledge, and it will be only a 3-minute video. I request all of you to pay attention to it.
Sir, seen?
Yes, sir.
Polymerase chain reaction, RT-PCR, in COVID-19 testing. COVID-19 testing usually begins with a swab of the nose or throat. Saliva, mucus, or fluid from a patient's lungs can also be used. The swab of a person with COVID-19 will contain a mixture of human cells, virus particles, and other microbes. Like all living things, the human cell has DNA as the genetic material that passes on information from one generation to the next. The DNA molecule is made up of 2 strands that look like a twisted ladder or double helix. However, the COVID-19 virus, SARS-CoV-2, and many other viruses, including HIV, have RNA as their genetic material, genome. RNA is chemically very similar to DNA, but has only a single strand. The virus RNA is surrounded by a nucleocapsid protein within the virus envelope. Other proteins are embedded in the envelope itself. The SARS-CoV-2 genome contains genes, blue arrows, that carry the directions for making these and other proteins that are needed to replicate the virus inside the human cell. The objective of COVID-19 testing is to identify part of the viral genome in the patient sample. This is usually the N gene, which carries directions for making the nucleocapsid protein. There is not enough viral RNA to detect directly in the patient's sample, so a process called reverse transcription polymerase chain reaction, RT-PCR, amplifies many copies of a segment of the N gene. Short, single-stranded pieces of DNA called primers recognize unique RNA sequences within the viral genome that bracket the target region of the N gene. After the first primer binds, an enzyme called reverse transcriptase extends, synthesizes, a single-stranded DNA copy of the viral RNA, known as complementary DNA, or cDNA. After the RNA is removed, the second primer binds to the other side of the single-stranded cDNA. Then, a second enzyme, taq-DNA polymerase, extends a second strand to produce the double-stranded DNA copy of the target region of the viral RNA. This DNA copy then undergoes successive cycles of amplification during which the DNA separates, denatures into single strands, both primers bind, anneal, to their target sequences, taq polymerase extends, synthesizes a new DNA strand, and so on. The number of copies of the target region of the viral genome doubles with each cycle. After 30 cycles, up to 1 billion DNA copies of the viral RNA are produced by PCR. In practice, The virus is typically detected with 30 to 45 cycles of PCR. Adding a fluorescent probe allows the amount of target DNA to be detected in real time and quantified after each cycle of PCR. This graph shows the detection of 200, 20, and only 2 virus RNA molecules in a controlled study. Results from swabs vary. A negative result is also shown. See these DNA Learning Center animations for a more detailed look at the PCR process.
Thank you, Jignesh sir. So as we have seen in this video, of course, there was some, the video wasn't playing so very smoothly, so apologies for that. So in a gist, what happens is that the single stranded RNA from the COVID-19 virus, okay, is there is a complementary chain of DNA which is produced against this virus, and then this DNA is replicated and multiplied. So we have in RT-PCR there are heating and cooling cycles, and whenever there is at the completion of one cycle, the amount of DNA which is there, it doubles, and it goes on doubling till the time it is detected, which typically happens somewhere between 30 and 45 cycles. Okay. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, that the RT-PCR is a highly sensitive test. It is extremely specific also. The RT-PCR typically can detect as low as 10 copies per ml of the viral RNA. Okay, and it usually in COVID-19 comes positive at the onset of symptoms. So on day 1 of symptoms also, in majority of the cases, the RT-PCR test will come positive. However, the test remains positive for up to 40 days in the maximum which has been documented. Okay, this is because in spite of the patient recovering from infection, there are viral particles which are present in the throat, or there are viral RNA remnants which are there and which will give the test positive. And it is because of this reason that follow-up testing or a repeat testing is not indicated. Once the patient is diagnosed positive, okay, the patient has to go through 14 days of quarantine or whatever as per hospitalization or as per the guidelines of the authorities. And then at the most a 7-day further quarantine at home. But in either of these cases, a repeat testing is not indicated for us to see if the patient has been cured or not. Another disadvantage of this method is that this test does not discriminate between a live and dead virus. So if a PCR test is positive, we call it as positive. But we cannot say if the patient is still infective or not, if the patient is harboring the live virus or not. That is, there is no way to find that out. So there is some a school of thought that, if the CT value is high, I'll come to that later, that, probably the CT value is high, that means the patient is highly infective, or if the antigen test is positive, the patient is infective. No, it is not like that. What we are detecting is the RNA. We are not detecting if the virus is alive or dead. So this is a very important point which I want to make. Next slide, please. So after PCR, there is one more similar test which is called CBNAT. It stands for cartridge-based nucleic acid amplification test, and it is a modified version of RT-PCR. The benefit of this test is it is a very simple test to perform. It needs a very small room. Like in RT-PCR, you need different rooms for different processes. There are 4 or 5 chambers, and you need negative air pressure, you need positive air pressure in the rooms to do the test. And at the same time, RT-PCR is extremely hazardous to the person doing the test. Now, CBNAT is nothing but RT-PCR. But this happens inside a small cartridge, which I have it in my next slide. It uses a very small instrument and uses a very small cartridge. So instead of the amplification of the RNA happening in a big room with different chambers, this can happen on the desktop also. It can happen on a table also, a 2 by 2 feet table. Okay, so that is the advantage of this method, it is safer, it is faster, it is easier to perform, and it is very much suitable where you need an urgent report, like in an ICU, or the patient is undergoing an LSCS or some emergency surgical settings or an angioplasty or something like that, where the time frame available is very low. That is the time where you can use the CBNAT test. Next slide, please. Yes, so this is what I was mentioned. This is the CBNAT instrument. Okay, and on the right hand side is a CBNAT cartridge, the one in blue color, which is held in a hand. So all that needs to be done is that the viral transport medium in which the nasopharyngeal swabs are there, that needs to be transferred in this cartridge, and the cartridge has to be sealed and put into this instrument. That's all. And within, say, around 1 hour's time, we should be able to get the report. So this is extremely easy. However, because it has got so many benefits, okay, it is extremely expensive. And currently, because of the pricing restrictions put in by the government, this test is not available at lot many centers because it is not affordable. But I'm sure when the restrictions ease off, this test will be more widely available and patients will be able to get the benefit of the test within a matter of few hours. Next slide, please. Yes, this I've mentioned already. Next slide. Okay. Now, the only thing, which is talked as frequently as RT-PCR is probably the CT value which is obtained from the RT-PCR. Now, we need to understand what this CT value is. CT value stands for a cycle threshold time. It is the amplification cycle at which the viral RNA becomes detectable. Okay, and it is a technical thing. It is available to every individual in a lab who is doing the RT-PCR test. Okay, based on this CT value, the lab will identify if the virus is present or not, right? And the CT value also depends on the amount of viral RNA or DNA which is present, in the meaning that based on the CT value, if the CT value is lower, which means that the detection time is less, and that means that the viral load is high. If the CT value is late, that is, if the amplification of the nucleic acid is later, that means that the viral load is less. The CT value is used to determine several other blood viral loads in several other viruses like HIV, HCV, HBV, okay, from a blood sample. Next slide, please. Now, this is a graph of the CT value, okay, wherein we are looking at the number of cycles of amplification on the x-axis and the fluorescence detection on the y-axis. So you can see that the time or the cycle number at which the graph begins to rise is the CT value, where we can see the green line which has been drawn on this graph. So this is, in this particular reaction, this is the CT value. This is a little bit of technical stuff that I'm bringing out, but it's just for our knowledge. Okay, it is not going to be very heavy, and promise. Next slide, please. Okay, now the most important question. Does the CT value help in determining the viral load, okay, especially in COVID-19? The answer is a big no. It does not. Jignesh sir, the screen is not very clear. I'm not sure if others are able to see it. Can we?
Is it okay, sir?
No, I think, sir, we can ask a couple of other people if they are able to read. I am not able to read.
No, the screen is not clear.
It is not properly. We can't see.
Okay. Mm. Sir, now it can see?
Yeah, yeah. Comparatively better.
This is better, yes.
Okay, okay.
Okay, so can I continue?
Yes, sir. Continue, continue.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
So ICMR, in its circular dated 5th of August, has mentioned several reasons for the CT value not being reliable when it comes to COVID testing. Okay. They have enumerated the following reasons. This is from the ICMR website. It is available in the document from 5th of August. ICMR clearly says that there are no reliable studies to prove this, to prove that there is a direct correlation between the disease severity and infectiousness based on the CT value. Secondly, they go ahead and tell that the patient per se does not die due to a higher viral load. It is not the virus which is killing the patient. It is the inflammatory reaction which is killing the patient. So the amount of virus present does not correlate with the severity of disease. The CT values which are done in different labs, they are specific for the kits which are being used by them. If you take lab A and you take lab B, there is going to be a vast difference between the CT values depending on what material they are using. So you cannot really compare the CT values between two labs. And because there are so many labs available which are doing the COVID test, there cannot be any generalization with regards to the CT value. Next slide, please. Another important aspect in COVID testing is the sample collection. Now, when we are collecting a sample, there are so many variables. Like you collect a sample from nasopharynx, you collect the sample from oropharynx, you have different individuals collecting the samples. Then the sample is being transported. After transportation, the sample may be waiting for the test. And after that, it goes in for RNA extraction. So it is important to note that none of the processes here can be standardized. If I am collecting a sample of patient A and say for example Dr. Jignesh collects a sample for the same patient, okay, the values are going to be different. So it is highly user dependent up to the tune of 30%. 30% of the results are going to be dependent on how the sample is being collected. Okay. Then transportation I have already mentioned. If there is a heating of the sample, if the cold chain is not maintained properly, or if the sample is in transportation for too long, then there is a high probability that there is a destruction of the RNA, which may lead to either a false negative or a borderline kind of result. Next slide, please. This I had mentioned earlier that CT values, they do not correlate with the severity of disease. There are several examples wherein the CT values have been in the tune of 32, 34, and they have developed severe disease. Whereas there may have been a case where the CT value is 14 or 15, which was only mildly symptomatic or was completely asymptomatic and was incidentally detected because the patient had to undergo a surgery or was scheduled for traveling or something like that. Okay, so it does not correlate. There are several examples where a high CT value also the patient has deteriorated very rapidly. Right? Another disadvantage is that there has been a lot of misinformation specifically due to one particular doctor defining cutoffs on social media, where he has said that CT value 24 and less needs hospitalization, and CT value 24 or more, it needs home quarantine. Now, this is absolutely bogus. If you are going, your clinical data does not support that. And if you're going to tell the patient, okay, you have a CT value of, for example, 31 and you stay at home, okay, and we are not going to monitor that patient, that there is a likelihood that the patient may deteriorate. So this needs monitoring depending on other factors as well, that the clinical condition, fever, oxygen saturation, other comorbidities which are present, all that needs to be taken into consideration, right? This I've mentioned again, the third point, that even a low viral load may land up in a very severe disease. So next slide, please. And we need to note that the RT-PCR test presently being conducted is a qualitative test. Okay, CT values do give a rough estimate of viral load here also. But the reasons I stated that it is not reliable because it is highly user dependent. And at the same time, being a qualitative test, we don't have any way currently available to find out what is the level of the virus in the sample, because we cannot compare it with a fixed standard. Now, to simply put what I'm saying is that if you have a scale of say 1 to 30, okay, and you measure a piece of thread on that, you can keep it on 1 and you can see how long that thread is, right? But here in this particular case, how will you measure the length of the thread if that scale itself is not available? So that is what I'm trying to convey, that we can say that, okay, this is a high viral load or a low viral load, but there is definitely no way to find out, because we cannot compare it with a fixed standard and say how much is the virus. We can only say, okay, it is less or high or whatever it is. And that too is going to be very, very user variable. So it is not advisable currently to use the CT values to estimate the viral load. And we will have to wait till the quantification of the test is available, which is currently not. Next slide, please. The next test available in diagnosis is the COVID antigen test, which is a rapid test and it is supposed to be a bedside investigation. It detects the nucleocapsid proteins of the COVID virus. It has a processing time of only 15 to 30 minutes. And when you go to a lab, the result is usually available within 3 to 4 hours for the within 3 to 4 hours. Now, the antigen test is said to be extremely specific, so much so that when an antigen is positive, we call that it is a confirmatory result and a PCR is not required further. Jignesh sir, we are at the antigen test, sir. Yeah, the screen is also very clear. Yeah, back. Yes. Next one, please.
Next slide. One more slide. Jignesh. Okay.
Yes. So now the antigen test, okay, as I mentioned, it is available in 3 to 4 hours, but there are certain restrictions when you do an antigen test from the lab. The restriction being that if a test is positive, we need to inform the ICMR and the MCGM, and the MCGM wants to get in touch with the patient first before the patient gets the report and runs away. So even if the result is positive, a lab will not be able to convey the positive result to the patient. If it is negative, the lab will release the report. But if it is positive, we have to wait till the next day morning for the report to be released. And that is one of the reasons why there is, and this holds true for PCR also, and that is also one of the reasons why the reports are getting delayed or coming late, after a couple of days or so, because the lab is required to hold on with the positive report so that the MCGM can reach the patient and then either put him in a quarantine center or give them guidance for a home quarantine. The COVID antigen test is suitable for mass testing and emergency situations, and now ICMR has recommended that in all containment zones, if possible, 100% of the population should be tested first with the COVID antigen test. This test is very cheap and does not require extensive user training, very easy to perform. As I mentioned, it is a bedside test. However, the major disadvantage of this test is the poor sensitivity of the test. Now, we are all aware that the sensitivity of the RT-PCR test is in the tune of around 80%. The antigen test is 50 to 84% compared to PCR. So when we hold PCR as 100%, the antigen test is going to give you only 50 to 84% sensitivity, which means that there is a possibility of 40 to 50% false negatives with the antigen test. And that is the reason that when an antigen test is done in a symptomatic individual, and if it is negative, we have to mandatorily recheck the test or do a follow-up testing with a PCR test. Next slide, please. Now, I would like to just hold on for a minute and to see if there are any doubts or questions with regards to this before I move further.
Ajay Shah, sir, please. Ajay Shah, sir.
Anybody else having any doubts? Okay, so I'll move further.
So there are two, three questions in the chat box. Can we do it now or later now? Later on.
Sir, we are do all the question answer session completing after this slide.
Yes, sir, later on is better.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we will do that at the end then. Let us
Yeah,
continue.
Okay.
So now this is the current advisory on testing, which is applicable right now. It was released by ICMR on 4th of September. Now here the ICMR classifies testing into 4 categories. The first category is the routine surveillance in containment zones and screening at points of entry in those zones. Now, as on date, there are more than 25 containment zones in our area, in Dahisar, Borivali, Kandivali area. So in these zones, ICMR says that you should do a rapid antigen test first for all patients who are symptomatic. So this includes all symptomatic healthcare workers, direct and high-risk asymptomatic contacts, people having other comorbidities, or asymptomatic high-risk individuals who are living in containment zones, even if they have not been exposed to a close contact, to a positive contact. This includes elderly more than 65 years of age and patients with comorbidities like hypertension, diabetes, cardiac disease, etc. IWS as a respiratory tract infection with fever more than 38 degrees with cough of an onset within last 10 days. So that is the categorization of ILI. If this patient gets hospitalized, then you called it SARI, severe acute respiratory tract infection. Okay. So this is for containment zones. Next slide. It tells us about the testing in non-containment zones. Okay, so before that, this is a strategy which has been adopted by the ICMR, that a rapid antigen test in a containment zone should be done for all individuals first. If the antigen is positive, and even if the patient is asymptomatic, okay, it is to be taken as positive and the patient has to be quarantined. If the antigen test is negative, we have to do a further classification into symptomatic and asymptomatic. If the patient is symptomatic, we have to go ahead and do an RT-PCR. And if the patient is asymptomatic, we don't have to do anything further. We just have to monitor the patient for development of any symptoms. And if symptoms develop later on, we again have to do a rapid antigen test first. And if negative, then a PCR. It's a very simple algorithm. Rapid antigen test positive or negative. Positive, it is confirmed. Negative, we have to look at symptoms and then decide on the PCR. Next slide, please. This is for non-containment areas. Here, the choice of test is an RT-PCR first. If any individual is symptomatic, okay, we have to do a RT-PCR. If there is an asymptomatic high-risk contact, then we have to do a rapid antigen test like it has been shown in the previous slide. So all non-containment areas, patient is having fever, cough, cold or any other atypical symptoms, we need to go ahead with RT-PCR, which is the choice of test. Either RT-PCR or CBNAT or TrueNAT, whatever is available. And if not, only then rapid antigen test as a second line investigation. Next, please. Now, category C deals with hospitalized patients or in hospital settings. This include all SARI patients, ILI patients who present in OPD, then asymptomatic high-risk patients who are hospitalized or they are seeking any surgical or non-surgical procedures, all pregnant women in or near labor for hospitalized delivery. So all these kind of cases, it is recommended to do an RT-PCR first. Next, please. Of importance are some points that no emergency procedure should, I'm sure all of us are aware of this, that emergency procedures should not be delayed irrespective of the COVID status, known or not. Ensure that there should not be any patient who should be sent back from the healthcare setting for the lack of COVID testing. Okay, in newborns, any patient presenting with acute respiratory illness or sepsis needs to be subjected to RT-PCR and then has to be managed further without waiting for the result. Next, please. Again, atypical manifestations like stroke, encephalitis, all these individuals, they have to be subjected to RT-PCR. And there is a fourth category, which is called testing on demand. Now, the government has given us the liberty or given patients the liberty that they don't need any prescription to do the test now. If there is a requirement of travel or resuming a job, or the patient has some other job, has to go internationally for even for tourism, not only for work purposes, all these people, they can just come to the laboratory and they can ask for a test. There is no requirement for a prescription anymore. There is one more category where the patient does not need to give any reason of testing also, which is a 17th category, that if you have a doubt in your mind that somebody you have come across somebody or a suspected case of COVID, or there are certain patients who have this in their mind that they have COVID, they cannot get it out of their minds. So in order to, as a pacifying measure, if such kind of patients also want to do the test, they can just walk into any center and do the test. They will not need a doctor's prescription. Next slide, please. Now this was for the diagnosis of COVID. We move on to other investigations, which are either follow-up or supportive investigations. Next slide, please. The first one is the hemogram or the CBC. Now, there are certain hematology parameters, okay, which are of importance. Okay. Now, initially at the presentation, many times we see that the leukocyte count or the lymphocyte counts are normal. But as the disease progresses, we tend to see a lymphopenia. This happens in several number of cases. It doesn't happen in all, but in many cases it does happen. So with the progression of the disease, the lymphopenia becomes more evident. Monocytosis has also been seen in several cases. And I would like to credit this to a physician colleague of ours, Dr. Akshay Nakrani, who was first to point this out to me that in his observation, his COVID patients were having monocytosis. And then I went up and looked into the literature. I found that there were several studies which were in fact mentioning that there is a monocytosis. Dr. Nakrani, I think, is a DMA member. I'm not sure if he's there with us today. So all credits to him for bringing this up.
Sir, he is there, I think.
Oh, he's there. Okay, good. Thank you, Akshay, sir. Yeah. So there are other parameters. One of them, which is very important, is the neutrophil lymphocyte ratio. Now, the NLR more than 3.3, okay, is associated with a poor prognosis. It is nothing but a neutrophil count in percentage divided by the lymphocyte count in percentage. Nothing but that. And some studies say 3.3. There are some studies say 3.5. There are studies which say 4 also. But the point is, if there is a progressive lymphopenia, and if you see that the NLR is going on increasing, that is the time you should suspect that the patient is likely to develop some complication or requires hospitalization. There may be a worsening in the clinical condition of this patient. The same holds true for the platelet lymphocyte ratio or the derived neutrophil leukocyte ratio, which is nothing but neutrophils divided by the leukocytes minus the neutrophils. Okay, so neutrophils divided by everything else except the neutrophils. So if this ratio is more than 2.8, again, it is said to be associated with a poor prognosis. And of course, low platelet count at presentation is secondary to DIC. Okay, that also has a possibility of the worsening of the condition of the patient. Next, please. There are other markers like CRP, which has shown a lot of promise. CRP has been found to be elevated at presentation in up to 86% of the cases. Now, CRP, we need to understand, is a non-specific marker. It's an inflammatory marker, and it is high in several viral and bacterial infections, in other infections also. But however, as a preliminary screening test, this has been found to be useful. Okay, and if a patient is found to be having an elevated CRP, then there is definitely a justification for further investigation in these kind of patients. However, as I mentioned, it is seen in only up to 86% of the cases, and that does not mean that a normal CRP rules out COVID. We need to look at the other clinical and hematological parameters also. And a persistently elevated CRP or a rising trend in a CRP level is again associated with a poor prognosis. Now, one thing which I want to bring forward here is that whenever we are looking at a parameter, like CRP, for example, in this case, or any other blood parameter, it is important, and if you are planning to monitor a particular parameter, it is important that this parameter should be monitored in the same lab. If you are going to do a CRP test in lab A, and then the CRP test is going to be repeated in lab B for monitoring purposes, that is not going to help much. In fact, it may lead to further problems with the patient. Maybe, there may be elevations and you may end up saying that the patient is worsening, while it may not be the case. So whenever, and this holds true for most of the parameters or most of the laboratory parameters, that whenever you are doing a test for follow-up, it is important that you do it from the same laboratory. Okay. Next slide, please. LDH is another marker. LDH is present in several tissues, including lungs. And whenever there is a severe respiratory infection or the virus infects the alveolar cells, the LDH is released in the alveolar cavities and then it is absorbed in the circulation. leading to high LDH values. So LDH elevation suggests that there is a severe tissue damage, and at the same time there is a reduced oxygenation in the lungs. And this is also a very useful marker from a prognostic point of view and will tell us if the severity of the disease is increasing or not. Next, please. D-dimer levels are elevated secondary to platelet activation and DIC. Now we need to understand what D-dimer is first and foremost. D-dimer is a fibrin degradation product. Now, whenever there is an inflammation in the body, there is platelet activation and there is a clotting which is going on in the body. Now, this clotting involves formation of fibrin, and as a reflex mechanism or as a defensive mechanism, the body will work towards breaking down of this fibrin. So, in inflammation, you have platelet activation and microclotting. Microclotting involves formation of fibrin, and there is a breakdown of fibrin. Now, this D-dimer is a product of that breakdown. So, it is a fibrin degradation product. It indicates indirectly that there is a clotting going on inside the body. Right? We all know that D-dimer is a very useful investigation for pulmonary thromboembolism, for deep vein thrombosis. So, it is the same mechanism. However, here, okay, there is a microclotting, and the D-dimer levels, they don't rise as high as pulmonary embolism, but they rise gradually and little by little. So this D-dimer also needs to be monitored, and because there are microthrombi, okay, we have multi-system disorders. Like there have been several cases of myocardial infarction. There were several cases of ischemic stroke due to this microclots being found in the system. Along with this, there may also be an elevated partial thromboplastin time or APTT, and the fibrinogen levels may also be reduced, but this typically happens late in the disease and in very, very severe cases. In most of the cases, these parameters remain normal, but D-dimer has to be closely monitored. Next, please. Ferritin again is another important marker. Many times you will see that everything else is normal, but the ferritin levels are high. Now, we all know that ferritin is associated with hemoglobin synthesis, and it is a storage form of iron. But we also need to know that ferritin is a modulator of immunosystem, and it is pro-inflammatory. Ferritin is present inside the cells, and this is present inside the alveolar cells also in the lungs. So whenever there is an alveolar damage, ferritin is released, and this ferritin acts as a pro-inflammatory molecule and then induces further inflammation. And this ferritin has a very important role in inducing a cytokine storm. Next slide, please. IL-6 or interleukin 6 is another parameter which has become very famous now. It is of course now available. Earlier it was not available very easily. Interleukin 6 is an inflammatory marker, and high levels are as expected seen during the cytokine storm. In addition to IL-6, there are several other markers like IL-10, IL-5, which are also elevated. Okay. However, there is no clear-cut cutoff wherein we can say that IL-6 levels are high and now the patient is in cytokine storm. That elevated IL-6 levels do not always correlate with the clinical condition of the patient, and hence you cannot take IL-6 as the only marker for an indication of cytokine storm. And this, what I'm saying about IL-6 also holds true for the other markers that we have just discussed. Okay, we need to take the comprehensive picture into consideration with the blood markers as well as the clinical condition of the patient. Okay, we cannot simply rely on one marker and take a decision. I think probably the only marker which should be a decision-making indicator should be the D-dimer, wherein probably a low molecular weight heparin or an aspirin needs to be started. I am sure the clinicians in the group will be able to better guide us on the therapeutic aspect of that. Right. Next slide, please. Okay, now there is a tremendous amount of miscommunication or misinformation regarding the antibodies also, which has happened. And the first message we need to take is that antibody testing as on date is not a diagnostic test. Antibody tests are useful for identifying past infections, irrespective of if they are IgG or IgM. It does not matter. It only indicates a past infection. So the concepts which we have with other viral illnesses like dengue or leptospira or chikungunya, wherein we say that IgM is an early infection and IgG is a late infection, that currently does not hold true for COVID. When we are doing an antibody test, IgG antibodies are preferred. And these are the type of antibodies which are recommended for surveillance purposes. IgG antibodies typically appear between 10 to 14 days after the illness from the onset of symptoms. But there are several cases wherein some are late responders and antibody levels are not seen for up to 3 to 4 weeks. There are also total antibodies which are available, which include a mix of IgG, IgM, and IgA. This test also can be used for surveillance purposes. However, we need to identify that in this mix, IgG antibodies are present or not, because it is the IgG antibodies which are considered to be the protective ones and conferring some amount of immunity to the patient. Next, please. Now, the antibody tests which are currently available are either qualitative or semi-quantitative. So what you will get on a report is you will either get a positive or a negative written, or there may be some value next to it, which is the index value. Now, index value is a semi-quantitative test wherever available. However, we need to understand that index values do not accurately represent the titer of the antibody present. Most of the labs, including ours, we are using index values. And these are only a vague estimate of the amount of antibody present. Another point of importance is that majority of the antibody tests which are available right now, they detect antibodies against the nucleocapsid antigens. A positivity with these antibody tests, though it says that this patient has had a past infection and there is some amount of immunity, these antibody tests are not useful for identifying patients as donors for plasma therapy. I'll tell you the reason in my next slide. So we have to remember that whatever tests available right now are semi-quantitative and against nucleocapsid antigens, and they are not suitable for identification of a recovered patient as a plasma donor. Next, please. Further moving to in the same extension, I would like to bring out that plasma therapy is currently not recommended as a routine standard for treatment. It is only permitted when there is a clinical trial going on. And the reason why I mentioned that the routine tests are not able to identify a patient as a plasma donor is the second point. That is that antibodies, that the patient needs to have positive antibodies against the spike proteins of the COVID virus. Now, what are the spike proteins? Spike proteins are present on the surface of the virus, which attach to the ACE receptors on the host cell or the patient cell. And these proteins have a role in inserting the viral RNA and infecting the host cell. Now, when we say antibodies against spike proteins, it means that the patient has developed antibodies against these spike proteins, which neutralize or block the entry of the virus into the host cell. And these are the type of antibodies which should be present in a patient's sample for him to be eligible as a plasma donor. Now, in order to be eligible as a plasma donor, there needs to be a specific quantification or titration of the spike antibodies, which is not currently easily available. Okay, and it is not. It is not currently available, and at the same time, there are no specific guidelines which state that there should be a particular level of antibody with spike protein which should be applied to that sample or the test result. So few days back, in the month of September, ICMR again has come out with a specific guideline for selection of donors as a selection of patient as a donor. ICMR says that there has to be antibodies against spike proteins, which is the first criteria. Then they have said that the lab reporting the spike proteins needs to have a fixed cutoff based on the assay which they are using. And if that is not available, then a titer of 1 in 640 is recommended. Now, this titration of antibodies or identification of antibodies can be done only by a lab which is either using the spike protein assay or is doing a plaque reduction neutralization test, which is not available currently in India. So it is up to the blood bank which is collecting the sample to verify or ascertain the antibody level of the spike antibodies before they select the patient as a plasma donor. Am I clear? I'll again repeat, it is up to the blood bank to identify the patient as a plasma donor by verifying if there are spike proteins available in the sample and the titer after that. Next slide, please. I think most of what I have told is present in the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare guidelines and ICMR guidelines. There are several articles which are easily available on the net. They can be referred at a click of a button. I will now be happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Ajay Shah sir, unmute yourself. Ajay Shah sir.
Yeah. So, Dr. Pratik, it was a very nice, very lucid presentation about the entire COVID. I think you gave us the entire journey right from the beginning till the last station of COVID. You have covered very nicely about diagnosis, first of all, of RT-PCR, different methods, and then importance of the CT value. Then you have also mentioned about COVID antigen importance and COVID antibody. So it was an excellent presentation. This will definitely help us to all of us, all the clinicians for the day-to-day management of the COVID patient, answering their so many questions and all. I think almost everything you have covered. Still, if there are any questions, I will go to the chat box and find out if there is any important questions which are not been covered by you. In the meantime, I have one question, Pratik,
Yes,
for RT-PCR, normally the collection is nasopharyngeal swab and oral swab. So I just want to know why can't only nasal swab be enough for the diagnosis? Is there any particular guidelines that we need to have both the material for the RT-PCR diagnosis management?
So basically, sir, we all know that this is a respiratory route of entry for the virus. Now, this is possible to through two routes. One is the oropharyngeal route and the nasopharyngeal route. So most of the times the virus goes into the nasopharynx and colonizes in the nasopharyngeal space. But there is also a possibility of the virus colonizing in the oropharynx. So typically 2 swabs are taken. One is from the nasopharynx and the second one from the oropharynx in the tonsillar fossa. And these 2 swabs are taken together and processed as a single test. The idea is to increase the sensitivity and not to miss any case, because as it is, the sensitivity of the PCR test is only 80%. And we want to be very sure that we are not missing any colonization in the oropharynx. And we want to pick up the infection at the first instance itself. So that is the reason why both nasopharyngeal and oropharyngeal swabs are collected.
Okay. There is some doctor had asked in between. Now I'm not seeing that question in the chat, but one Dr. Bindu had asked that what is the sensitivity and specificity and how it differs between RT-PCR and our CBNet.
Yes. So see, the CBNet, we have to understand that CBNet is nothing but an RT-PCR test, okay, which is happening in a small plastic box, in a cartridge. Okay, so when we are talking about RT-PCR, we are talking about huge infrastructure, big rooms. When we are talking about CBNet, we are talking about it happening on the desktop in a small plastic container. So CBNet is nothing but RT-PCR happening in a small container. So the sensitivity of both are the same. There is no difference in the sensitivity. There may be a difference in the sensitivity between labs, between CBNet and RT-PCR, depending on the kits which we are using or the kits which the other lab is using. But by and large, the sensitivity and specificity of both are same. There is not much of a difference.
Many of the doctors have been asking about the cost of CBNet and RT-PCR, but I think probably as far as the cost is concerned, the government, the local authority has kept the price. So whatever the method we do, the price cannot be more than that. Am I right, Dr. Pratik?
Yes, absolutely, sir. In fact, initially when there was a capping of 4,500 rupees to begin with, which was decided by the ICMR, that time CBNet was still available on a higher scale because the cost could be recovered. Now what has happened with the cost coming down to 2,500 and now 1,600? The CBNet test is not affordable at all. And even in emergency situations, when the patient is actually in a real need of a CBNet test, the hospital having the infrastructure, the lab having the infrastructure, cannot recover the cost from the patient. They are not allowed to do it. And because of which, several labs have now stopped doing CBNet test.
Right.
And we are one of them. It is not possible. There is no compensation nor any price reduction which has been passed on by the government. And unfortunately, because of which, the testing has stopped now. But it is still available in bigger hospitals like, I'm sure you are doing it, sir, CBNet?
No, I have also stopped it.
Right.
After the cap, I have stopped it because it is not possible. It is not a viable project.
Right. It is 3 times the current market cost.
Exactly.
Yes.
What
So,
Dr. Suryakant Pandit wants to know, mostly leukopenia plus N is more than L ratio works in primary diagnosis. I didn't get the questions properly. Probably N by L ratio he wants to know about in case of leukopenia. Normally there is no leukopenia in the COVID. We have not found much. I think there is always a normal WBC count.
Yeah.
And
So
N by L ratio works.
Yes. So the ratio, see, we need to understand that the tests which have been discussed, the NLR ratio or the PLR ratio or the derived NLR, all these ratios, okay, are also possible in other viral infections. They are also possible, and these are not diagnostic tests. These are investigations which will lead you to suspect, and then you need to go ahead for a diagnostic test. You cannot diagnose a COVID based on an NLR ratio or a high monocyte count. No,
it's a supportive test.
These are observations. Yes. So these are not diagnosed. You can definitely look at these, and if something you find positive, you need to forward the patient for further diagnosis for confirmatory investigations.
Fine, fine. One of the question I think you have already covered, but I'll just read the question. Why are we doing total antibody test? Why not only IgG? I think you have covered the.
Yes. So as I mentioned, that both are allowed to be done. IgG definitely is a better test. When IgG not available, ICMR has also approved the use of total antibody tests. But however, we need to find out if that the total antibody test is positive. We need to find out if there has been an IgG response in that particular patient. So further subclassification is necessary. You can use a total antibody test as a primary screening test to see if there are antibodies or not. And if there are antibodies, then you need to subclassify and look for IgG antibodies also.
Dr. Akshay Nakrai wants to know anything about reinfection, any diagnostic dilemma. Have you come across any case of reinfection?
Sir, to be very frank, this is again a diagnostic dilemma for us also. The reason being that there are so many cases, okay, which have viral RNA or viral remnants for as long as 6 weeks after the infection. And if the patient, first of all, the repeat testing is not indicated, and if the patient develops some symptoms and the test comes positive again, we really don't know if it is a live virus or a previous infection, the previous RNA which is persisting. So it is very difficult to find out if there is a reinfection or it is an old viral particle which is just lying there for some time, you know. It is a diagnostic dilemma for us also, Dr. Akshay. But I think we can take it in light with the antibody testing also. One other point which I would also like to mention is that all patients who recover from COVID, they don't develop an antibody response. There are 8 to 10% non-responders, and they come out because of good therapy available and also a very strong T cell response. But they don't develop antibodies in up to 8 to 10% of the cases. So if in such cases you have a primary COVID positive report, okay, and a follow-up antibody testing is negative, and then again you have a COVID positive report after at least 6 weeks, beyond 42 days, then yes, you can probably suspect a secondary infection.
Fine, fine. So, I think there can we take some more question?
Yes.
Also, I just want to add on what Dr. Pratik said in the beginning, that the COVID is not just only a respiratory disease; it's a multi-system disease. And at our place also, I have come across 2 or 3 cases. One case to one of my neighbor, because that's why I distinctly remember that the lady was COVID positive, admitted, and then she was done 14 days and she came back home. And after 4 or 5 days, she developed a acute renal failure, and the creatinine suddenly went up to 10.87 or something like that. And only complaint she had one day prior, that she had a lot of vomiting. And once again, she got admitted, and now she is fine without any dialysis. But this is COVID has given a lot of other, besides lung disease, as a sequelae of the disease, lung fibrosis, probably acute renal failure, some neurological disorders, and there are so many things that we as a clinician should remember.
Very true. So there are a couple of more questions I can see in here.
Yeah.
After how many days positive patients become non-infective? Now, see, typically it is said that the patients become non-infective in 10 to 14 days. And that is the reason for the patient being in quarantine for 14 days. However, to be on the safer side, there have been some documented cases wherein the patients have been found to be infective for up to 3 weeks. And that is why after 14 days of quarantine, the patient is advised to home quarantine for 7 days more. So total 21 days. So that is, I think that answers the question.
Dr. Lakhani wants to know if HRCT test positive and RT-PCR negative, can we start the treatment?
Yes, we can. See, in the current scenario, if an HRCT test is positive, the radiologist also is going to, call it as a COVID unless it is other way around. And in the current scenario, I think all fever should be taken as COVID-19 unless you have a strong evidence that it is something else. So if there is an HRCT positive, yes, you should start with treatment, and you should send a second sample for PCR. Because as I mentioned, that the sensitivity of PCR is around 80 to 85%. So the treatment has to be started, and the second PCR test needs to be sent within 48 hours. If that is also negative, then we completely have to go by the clinical picture. We cannot, withhold with the treatment for those matters.
I think we are done almost. Can we hand it over to the Dr. Vinayak to end the session?
Friends, so I think so. No more questions are remaining. It is very interesting and a very informative question answer session. Thank you, Dr. Pratik Jariwala sir and Dr. Ajay Shah sir. Now here I am requesting our chairperson, Dr. Sanjay Wani sir, to give the vote of thanks. Dr. Sanjay Wani sir.
Hello, sir. Before vote of thanks, can I ask some question?
Yes.
Dr. Pratik. Sir, as a general practitioner, we are facing one problem. Patient comes morning, he got fever at 7 o'clock, and 9 o'clock he come in our clinic and say, Doctor, it's maybe COVID. It's maybe modu kadu thi gyu che, test avti nathi. So that which test is we can advise within 3-4 hours? Is any test or within 1 day?
We can do an antigen test, the result of which is available in 3 to 4 hours.
Yeah.
Okay, but as I mentioned, that if the test comes positive, the lab is not allowed to give the report on the same day. So for such cases, if you find that the patient does not have anything and the report is likely to be negative, you can send this patient to the lab.
Yeah.
If a similar patient comes, you have some findings and you think it could be COVID and you need to pass diagnosis, it is better to send the patient either for RT-PCR or a rapid antigen test at a BMC center, wherein they will just do the test and write it on the paper and tell you it is positive or negative within within 1 hour.
But in first day it's maybe positive.
First day it is positive at the onset of symptoms. It is supposed to be positive. If it is not, it is supposed to be repeated after 48 hours.
After 48. Yes, sir. Sometimes some patient have symptoms, but they are not ready for the do test. Then common our patients. So that time which blood test you can advise? They are not ready for RT-PCR.
They are not ready for RT-PCR. Then what I would suggest is that the surrogate markers which we have just discussed, CBC, CRP, D-dimer, ferritin, LDH.
I have seen, sir, so many times CRP is normal, but patient COVID is positive.
Yes.
So
yes, it does happen. It does happen. Yeah. So that's why I said that these are the investigations which, for example, if the patient comes with fever 2 days fever to you.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to do a PCR test. Right? You do these 4 or 5 markers. Even if nothing is elevated, okay, you have a baseline available. Yeah. But if the patient condition worsens after 2 days or 48 hours, you can again repeat these parameters and you can see which way the patient is going. So you have a baseline value and you have a value which is after a few days, okay, which will help you decide, and then you probably, if they are not going in the right direction, you can immediately advise hospitalization and then you can do a PCR. That is what would be required.
And sir, HRCT?
Yes.
HRCT test is reliable on first, second day, 1 or 2 days?
Sir, I'll tell you what. Now, there are several cases which have come across wherein the CT has been normal.
Yeah.
The COVID test has been positive.
Positive.
And vice versa, both ways.
Yeah.
Okay. So, day one, I'm not sure. See, I'm not a radiologist. I'm not seeing CT scans. Okay, I don't come across such patients.
Yeah.
But at any given point of time, when you're doing the test, it will give you the status of the patient at that particular point of time. If you are doing a CT scan on day 1 or 2, it may be clear, but maybe day 5 you may have shadows, right? So I think we should look at the comprehensive picture rather than relying completely on CT scan in the, and you can rely on it as long as PCR is not available. Otherwise, I feel that PCR and CT both should be taken together.
Sir, excellent lecture, very informative, and it's very simple language. That is important. There is disturbance. Jignesh? There is disturbance.
Yes, yes, sir.
So there is one more question. If patient antibody titer is high, IgG and IgM present, then after how many days can we repeat the test? And when can we treat the patient? Now, see, if the IgG, IgM titers are high, you don't have to do anything further. You just take a history in the last 14 days or 21 days if the patient has had any fever. If the antibodies are present, then it is a past infection. We don't need to treat the antibodies. We don't have to. So there is no indication or question of repeating the test. It means that the infection has come and it has gone. If the patient is still having symptoms, then do an RT-PCR. But there is no need of repeating the antibody test. Antibodies, we want them to be present, right? And they are going to be present for some months at least.
So excellent lecture, very informative for general practitioners, very simple language. So you are a ex-professor, sir. Your lecture is just like professor.
Oh, thank you.
Excellent lecture, sir.
You inspire me, sir.
So from DMA and from myself, I am giving vote of thanks. And Dr. Ajay Shah, Dr. Vinayak Desai, Dr. Lakhani, they all are given excellent. So thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you everybody for listening patiently. Thank you, Jignesh sir, Vinayak sir, Ajay sir, everybody on the DMA panel for having me here. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Dr.
I was able to clear the concepts.
Okay,
Yes,
thank you,
sir.
Dr. Sanjay Wani, sir. Dear friends, please don't go away. Small announcement from our DMA Culture Department. So I am requesting our DMA Cultural Secretary, Dr. Shashikant Lange, sir, to say few words. Dr. Shashikant Lange, sir.
Om Dhanvantare Namaha. Good evening, friends and my senior colleagues. On behalf of DMA, the Cultural Department, मैं डॉक्टर शशिकांत लांडगे आप सभी का इस नवरात्रि के पावन अवसर पर हार्दिक शुभकामनाएं देता हूं. Every year DMA is organizing some cultural programs, but due to this pandemic 2019 is worse for this everyone in this world, and we are also facing the same problem. So the cultural department, the programs which are awaiting a monsoon picnic, a nature walk, and now this running दांडिया program. So हम सब ये प्रोग्राम स्थगित किए हैं ये महामारी के वजह से. So please दहिसर मेडिकल एसोसिएशन इस एसोसिएशन के तरफ से डीएमए कल्चरल डिपार्टमेंट से हम इस बारे में क्षमा चाहते हैं. हम सभी के तरफ हम दहिसर मेडिकल एसोसिएशन की तरफ से आप सभी को सर्व मंगल मांगल्ये शिवे सर्वार्थ साधिके शरण्ये त्र्यंबके गौरी नारायणी नमस्तुते. आए हुए सभी संकट दूर होकर सबको आयुष में सुख और शांति प्रदान हो, यही मैं मां के चरणों में प्रार्थना करता हूं. सभी हमारे वैद्य, सभी डॉक्टर्स अपने तरह से कोशिश कर रहे हैं कि इस महामारी पे कैसे विजय प्राप्त की जाए, और मां से मैं प्रार्थना करता हूं सबको अपने अपने कामनाओं में यश दे, सब अपना और अपने परिवार का ख्याल रखें, और हमारा कर्तव्य के तरफ से हम हमारे समाज के भावनाएं जो निष्ठा है उसकी हुई उसके तरह भी कुछ कर्तव्य निभाए. थैंक यू, धन्यवाद. डॉक्टर जिग्नेश एंड डॉक्टर तवटे सर, डॉक्टर विनायक, आपने मुझे तो दो शब्द बोलने के लिए दो शब्द बोलने की परमिशन दी, इसके लिए मैं आपका आभारी हूँ. थैंक यू.
Thank you, Dr. Shashikant Lange, sir. And today is the 12th webinar of our series, and Dr. Pratik Jariwala sir is delivering excellent lecture to us and updating our knowledge about to understanding the lab investigation in current COVID-19 epidemic. So thank you, Dr. Pratik sir, Dr. Ajay sir, Dr. Madhavji sir, Dr. Sanjay sir, Dr. Shashikant sir, and Dr. Vinayak sir. Once again, happy Navratri to all. And behalf of the Dahisar Medical Association, here I am Dr. Jignesh Vasant Chauhan, announce the end of the today webinar session. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.